Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. So I've had an interesting request, twice as a matter of fact, by two different people in the last week, and I'm not sure what's prompting it. And it's to cover evolution, which was my second episode. And I totally understand why people would never know that evolution was covered because, we don't really search in the channel search that often. For those of you who haven't been to the deepthoughtsradio.com, you probably haven't searched in that field. You know, if you're like me, I'm like you, we try to get the autofocus here. We try to find things, just by latest and greatest, because that's what we want, right? We want the latest and greatest stuff. Got the old HB helicopter's attention here. I know they want to smoke cigars. One day, I'd love to have those pilots up there sitting here. We'll do a big show. Maybe I'll call the department and say, get your asses over here. It would be funny. So, because evolution is such a deep subject, and because since I made the evolution episode, which I think is extremely thorough, and it came off the... damn, my lighter's still really, really fucking hot to put my hand on it. Since I had just come off of an anthropological study of the missing link, and this is one of the areas where I have done my own personal research and theories on how, in a gravity-based world, how life would form in a spherical nature, and then hit the surface of a particular area once it reaches a certain mass, and as it scratches, it creates little holes, and it creates limbs by creating leaks where holes, the internal matter comes out and it gets protected and becomes a leg. It goes into all that stuff. I don't think we're going to go so scientific, at least in that meticulous physics thing. But if you want to think about how we are shaped, the way we are shaped, the way that every body unit seems to have two limbs, right? Even a centipede only has little unit and then two legs. And a crab's got a unit for every two legs. A spider's got units, At least I think the spider does. But anyway, go see that. It's episode 2. Easiest way, again, just go to deepthoughtsradio.com, hit the search field, type in evolution, and go see the other episode. But now here's the thing. I'm setting up. I don't even know what I want to do. I was thinking about do rockets work in space or in a vacuum. I want to add a little bit more research to that because it's going to take, a whole hour up. It's going to need an hour's worth of dialogue, and I want to really go for not only the engines we have today, but the theoretical engines of the future. Just a preview, I think there's scenarios with today's engines that don't work, and I think there's scenarios of futuristic engines that could work. We haven't built the futuristic ones, so we don't know yet. And again, that's rocket engines. But evolution is something that comes up a lot in conversation because one of the interesting things that happens with the awakening is that you're awakened for a particular subject matter. It could be that day in September 2001. It could be a recent piece of news where some really bad thing happened and you find out that there's people who fake those things or at least orchestrate them and real things occur. Whatever completely evolution-less topic gets you awake. People will, once their mind wakes up, their self-realization wakes up, and they start to ask, more fundamental questions. Now, you could wake up without any of the big, heavy stuff, and you're simply going to philosophy classes, you are going to evolutionary classes, and as long as you can think for yourself for 1 second, which, when we're young, we're all asleep and we're all dumb. It's just the truth. I was right there. Okay, man. I didn't really wake up until probably I was 33 years old. I mean, there were some things I was aware of, but they were just low-hanging fruit things, right? But what is the conversation of evolution? I've had it so many times. I've seen so many different angles, especially in my lounge, but even on telephone calls with people. And the conversation evolves based on the fabric of the human being who's asking the question or trying to dig deep. For instance, if someone is very religious, it is imperative for them to put a bias into all the information that they learn and root it back to a God-based creationism technique. And I'm not really talking about, because you can still believe in creationism and not be what they might call a holy roller, right? But there are people on this planet that believe that the world is about 5,000 years old. And those individuals will root everything back to the 5,000 year thing. How they deal with rumors of things that are much older than 5,000 years, you get that standard thing. That's how the devil works, and he buries dinosaur bones and stuff. And again, we're going to cover dinosaurs in season 5, which this will be inside of, I think. Season 5 intro is taking forever, man. Trying to make it as sweet as possible. Oh, you're going to get tired of hearing that. So the other one is you have a super atheist scientist who has to link everything back to popular science. And then, what can I say? You start to get into the trust game. And you get guilt-tripped if you don't trust scientists. Well, all these people said this, and so you have to trust them. There's a gentleman out there who does some pretty amazing videos. And I mean fantastic videos, but he has gone after some of the conspiracies, especially flat earth. And even though I'm not technically a flat earther, his dig, I guess he's done 2 videos. I had watched one that was very recent where he has the beard and the glasses. He's a bald-headed guy. He's a British accent. And again, I really respect this guy, but his first attempt at going after this when he didn't have glasses and he looked a little different was the most pathetic, loyalist thing I've ever heard. His quotes of what flat earth people believed was so wholly inaccurate and so ridiculous. Like, he picks stupid things that I don't think anyone's ever said, and then he said that they say that, and then he proceeded to debunk them. And it's just like, come on. Never takes on the issues of NASA, right? NASA is just, for that dude, 1,000% real. He cannot be caught in his circle of friends and his self-image ever saying anything bad about those organizations, despite the mountains of evidence that they lie. Never takes all the photographs that have been claimed to have been taken from space. If he even mentions the blue marble shot from Apollo 17, never really examining the first one that came back where the Red Sea's all screwed up, because it's a composite shot. Later fixed and never told that it was fixed. I've shown it to you several times on the show. Then you have the ufologist, who's a little bit more rational, in my opinion, because they're sitting there going, okay, something for nothing, atheist, Big Bang, horseshit. Physics dies, gravity's a push, not a pull, that all falls through. As far as religion, well, look at religion. It's a fiasco. It's a complete child-touching fiasco. It always has been. I mean, there's tomes from certain religions about the legality of touching kids, mostly man on boy action. It's just horrible. And then they built the whole foundation of how we're supposed to behave. Interestingly enough, I believe that there is a creator that he or she did manage to push through some pretty divine knowledge about how to be good to each other in some religions. It's interesting. But your ufologist is looking for sort of these unexplained jumps in evolution that don't make any sense based on at least what we're allowed to know. And then you kind of have your fourth group, which is sort of how I view us. We're sort of all, we're just going to look at things and try to make sense of them. And maybe we have some sort of God that is creating, for all intents and purposes, a matrix, right? This form of reality. We dream in this reality, so we get this sub-reality inside this reality, so that's interesting, right? We recognize that there is love in the universe and all these emotions, and we don't believe Kurzweil's bag of chemicals. We tend to think that love is a force that actually comprises reality. It seems to be the utter objective of man. It's interesting, right? We love our food if we're starving. We love our relatives if we're bellies full. It's interesting. Now, my own background is very, very interesting to me personally, because I grew up in the sort of the Big Bang, I guess, arena, but I have to tell you, without knowing why I felt like that was not true, I never felt it was true. I studied it as if I felt it was true, and it's always a really groundbreaking moment when you go into science trying to find answers, and all you find is more proof that they don't know what they're talking about. And before I ever really dove into religion, which is about 19 years old to about 21, I know it only sounds like 3 years, but it was super duper intense, right? I lived inside the community that ran the church, as I always say. I used to tell people that, I was raised in the Catholic Church, kinda. I got the disturbing, weird world of that place. And then about 8 years old, my dad stopped going to church, so then I stayed home with my dad on Sundays. No one forced me to go, which I have to say, my parents were pretty cool. My mom who was raised and had that god-awful guilt that they are such masters at, they let me stay at home. It was cool. You go for Christmas, maybe for Easter or whatever. You're just going because, there's some food. So then as I said many times, and I won't go through it, but I dove into science like on a crazy, crazy level. I always found space to be utterly, utterly fascinating. Just looking up at the stars always just made my creative mind go. My theoretical mind went nuts as a kid. And so I simply said, look, I'm going to learn everything on planet Earth that is available to learn how things work. Cosmology. Dove into that. Every single entity that man had ever theorized, from a pulsar to a brown dwarf to a black hole to a planet to all the different classes of planets, classes of moons, all that stuff, quasars, got into it. And so that was macro. Every time I research the stuff, you get to these barriers where you find out they don't really know what things are, and there's a lot of disputes about science of, if things are coming at you, they're blue. If they're coming at the speed of light, they're going away from you. It tends to do a redshift. And so they're trying to figure out that the universe expands and then Earth's back in the middle again. And then, Hawking says, oh, no, we're on the edge of a balloon. Just theory to dig themselves out of bad theory. All right. So then I thought, okay, I started out science in the subatomic world, but I hadn't really gone back and didn't quite know where to go because, again, the internet wasn't around. I'd read everything in the World Encyclopedia about subatomic physics, and, because it all pertained to the phenomenon of fission, and, I don't think even fusion was much more than a paragraph of conceptual thinking. We didn't have machines that could fusion things together. But I have to say, when I saw Back to the Future and the dude backs up the car in the first episode and he's throwing all the trash in the back of the fusion unit to get him to the next movie, my brain was like right there. I totally know what he's talking about. Put anything in there, it'll work. Okay. So then you get into subatomic physics, and Hawking was my dude. I mean, he was the first one to really write books and talk about it in super detail. And so that was nice. I had a chance to jump off. When I grew up and moved out of my hometown, I went to bookstores. I went right to the super science sections. Then I learned about universities, and I went to those sections. A lot of the university books are definitely trying to teach the mathematics of these entities. And so I didn't want to get into math. I was like, I still don't have a model. It's almost like math would be the next step after you have a purpose, after you have a physical model. In my brain, that's how it works. I don't need to know how much the girder's going to bend until I know I need a girder to go across two posts, right? Two supports. Okay, I'm laying this down because I want to talk about evolution in a way that doesn't get pigeonholed into one of these biases. So I want to cleanse you of the bias, hopefully, so that we can have a much bigger thought process in our heads. Now, if you just watch the evolution episode 2 and then you watch this, you're going to have some overlap. What can I do? Same subject. But since people don't go back, redoing it is actually very valuable, right? So where do we formally get educated that a human being thought about evolution and figured it out? Darwin. Darwin is the son of an aristocrat. He's a rich kid, doesn't need to work, gets himself a boat called the Beagle, I believe, and he goes down the coast of Europe, and then he bounces into the coast of Africa. And the entire time he's kind of getting out the boat and grabbing samples of stuff, because supposedly he has this epiphany that things evolve. Well, I think that one of the interesting things we can see in terms of evolution is dogs. We crossbreed the crap out of them. We can see that they develop skills. The purebreds have skills that pay the bills, right? They're doing something that's valuable to us. There's hunting dogs. There's big giant Newfoundlands, which were used by sailors to save sailors in the water because they're massive horses, and they have this really thick, hair. Obviously, it wasn't evolved to help us save ourselves, but sailors would grab onto these things as they swam back to the boat, and then they get off on the ladder and they'd be okay. Crazy, wild. But we bred them personally for our own use, be it pleasure or service. And we're doing this as human beings, and so we're thinking, well, geez, before Darwin was ever an idea or a mistake from his parents, man has understood part of what Darwin submitted, which was survival of the fittest. That has got to be one of the most low-hanging fruit, asinine things to publish in a paper and claim that you have split the atom of evolution. Let me tell you the first time survival of the fittest worked out for man. Now, unconsciously, it would be the water hole from 2001: A Space Odyssey. The two tribes of prehistoric man, early Homo sapien, probably even hominid, for Christ's sake, chimpanzees, gorillas, whatever, right? They're going to have you're going to have water hole. Water holes are very interesting depending on your geography. They're rare. You might have more forest than you have water holes. And so water holes become this coveted thing. How many nature videos have you seen where the elks are trying to drink some water, but there's some alligators in there? There's tigers drinking, water buffalo, and they're always fighting the indigenous, water predators, usually alligators. Okay. On that subconscious reptile mind, they knew how to preserve their life. They knew that when they had an advancement in technology, as 2001 portrayed in the fictional movie, the monolith taught the monkey about the bone. Then he goes back to the water hole and beats the living shit out of that tribe, and they take the water hole back. End of Act 1, throw the bone in the air, turns into the satellite. We're on to the next act. Okay. Homo sapien, where do we find out about this? Well, at some point, man became sentient, self-aware, looks into the water, has the narcissistic moment of seeing his own reflection. Whoa, who is that? Touch my face. Thing in there touched his face. Oh my God, I'm going to fight the water for a little while because I don't know it's not me. And after a while, I'm like, I burped and it burped, and I smiled and it smiled. And you know what? When my lover, Homo sapien, came up next to me, or my companion, I saw their face, and I know exactly who they are. I don't know who I am, but I know who they are. And they're next to me. I'm like, how are you in the water now? And they're like, well, that's you right there. And we're talking, we're making this thing. Okay. So we have the self-realization moment. Now we can start thinking. Good old-fashioned thinking. And then you realize that, probably every being on planet Earth, save maybe birds of some sort, and it's only because they fly, human beings used to operate in harems. Just like lions, just like monkeys, and I'm not saying we're related to those things, I'm just saying one man was the big guy, the adult, and he had all the reign of all the women, and if all the young kids tried to get it with your women, you beat them off until you get old, and then you don't get any more. Such a bummer. Then we advance up, we start developing much more technology, shelters and food, and we start talking a language of some sort, and then it advances up where survival of the fittest is all about still the same thing, but the biggest dude with the biggest stick gets his way. Gets the women, gets the food, gets whatever he wants to do. We understood survival of the fittest. How many millions of years before Darwin was ever conceived of himself? It's been around for a long time, and it was not an epiphany. Now, if you study Bruce Lipton and you read his book, Wisdom of Your Cells, or The Wisdom of Your Cells, something like that. Again, I had to buy the book for about $80. He reads it. It's amazing. It was on YouTube at one point. It's been taken down. It's great. I would get the book on audio, let him read it to you. He's got a great voice. But he studies something called epigenetics. And epigenetics is where we get real evolution. The multidimensional 4D, 5D, million D chess. that is evolution. It doesn't negate God, folks. It just simply says this is how he does it. All right. There was a guy that worked for Napoleon. Napoleon, just to recap real quickly, was a calculus genius. Because he knew calculus really well, he understood how cannons work. And he ran the cannon division of the French army, and he would destroy his enemies. He knew exactly how to hit a wall, hit inside. He was just a genius at that. Because of that, he rose up and became the king of France. Not the king, but the leader, right? I don't know if they called him a king or not. He was a very fair-minded individual, and one of his things that he did was he said, if you're the best person for the job, you get the job. I don't care about your lineage or any of that crap, as long as you're not a crazy person. And as the story goes, there was a gentleman with a last name de la Marck. De la Marck has been written down in the history books as being a peasant who was a genius. And he was on this mission at least 20 years before Darwin was on his pathetic little mission. Now, I have to give Darwin a little bit of credit in just saying that he had the idea that this sort of thing occurred. He just wasn't smart enough to put the pieces together. Maybe it had to do with being rich, maybe not. Who knows how de la Marck got so intelligent, but what de la Marck pioneered by the 1790s, was epigenetics. Epigenetics has to do with every single interaction the human mind and body has, not only with itself, but with nature. Now, when we see a giraffe, we always say that whole thing about the neck stretches out because it wants to eat things that are higher and higher and higher. Well, maybe. Maybe that's it. It certainly seems to work out for them. And giraffes are like one of the most amazingly bizarre creatures on this planet, aren't they? Just when you see them run, it's really strange. When you see them make love, it's really strange. When you see them fight, they have these big long legs that they know how to kick out, but they also swing their head with these little nubs that they hit each other with. A lot of people who have tried to anthropomorphize them in petting zoos have been surprised that they're not so lovey-dovey. Right? It's not Big Bird, people. But de la Marck figured out not only the low-hanging fruit, whoa, you see the pun there, of survival of the fittest. He realized that climate had a huge influence on how we change. He also realized that our cells are alive, and that when you touch them, we have some sort of message that's going back and forth on our body. I'm not sure he understood the electrical properties of it, although by his age, electricity was, obviously understood. Who knows? The Egyptians seem to really understand electricity really well. But he figured out that your brain communicating with your body plays a role in your evolution. Your will to be a particular way could change the way you are. So he masters this. He documents this. And it's a very, very deep subject, which I'd have to reread the book to really regurgitate. In season 1, episode 2, was really, really fresh with de la Marck's research. So if you want to get super detailed, jump off on that episode and you'll get a good preview of what you'll get out of that book. So what happens? There's a Battle of Waterloo. When the French lost the Battle of Waterloo to the British have a divide and conquer protocol that goes all the way into stealing and usurping the discoveries of other people and then claiming them as their own. They stole the Rosetta Stone. They don't say they discovered it. It was one of supposedly Napoleon's generals, and something you need to know about the Rosetta Stone is that they say on the Rosetta Stone, in the bottom 2 languages especially that we know how to read, that there should be a Rosetta Stone at every, for that era, Ptolemy IV, talking about how his father, the third, was killed, and how he's going to get revenge, and how there's going to be new ways. On the stone, it says that there's one of these in every single port down the Nile. We haven't found any others. But there should be, I don't know, half a dozen other Rosetta Stones somewhere down the Nile that don't have the big piece missing out of the top. Wouldn't that be interesting? Now, the Ptolemies are the Romans that took over Egypt When Rome conquered Egypt, they were going to destroy the whole place, and the Ptolemies fell in love with the place and said, no, we're going to take care of this. And the Ptolemies ended up dressing up like the locals, and Cleopatra's, I believe, the 9th generation ruler. She was the first queen of their era. And so Elizabeth Taylor playing Cleopatra is genetically closer to than having an African player. And you'll hear a bunch of folks say that she was black. She wasn't black. She was Roman. That's why there's hundreds of thousands of tombs of Roman people buried underneath the soil in big caverns in Egypt. They loved the Egyptians, all right? If you're worried about getting credit in your I guess, African American, as they say, I say black, don't worry. Your people built those pyramids. I mean, just look at the faces. I mean, it's like, it was taken over at some point, and the Arabs did become pharaohs and did paint their own kind on the wall. But if you go back far enough, the pharaohs are black as night, and they were completely capable of painting what they saw, painting what they are, right? Fortunately, they never painted how they built their pyramids, right? You can expect at least one more Egyptian episode in season 5 for sure. So Darwin steals, or is given, all of de Lamarck's research. De Lamarck is no longer. All right. Well, problem is that Darwin can't understand epigenetics. He can't understand it. He cannot conceive of the multidimensional science that de Lamarck came up with. And so he throws it all away. And you just go read his works. That's all he could understand. But anything he did write was most likely lifted off of de Lamarck, just the footnotes that he could figure out. All right. So there's your official science of evolution from the aristocratic British. I'm not saying anyone in Britain is the same way today. Back then, that's how they were. Everybody has their flaws. Now, anthropologists developed their skill sets over a couple centuries, and they have become the much more interesting researchers of the past. Now, unfortunately, with all these type of researches, if you ever ask yourself, how does an anthropologist pay for an expedition? How does a archaeologist pay for their expeditions? Look no further than the first act of Indiana Jones, where that squirmy kind of guy that comes to him at the college has, they have a new mission they're going to go on, and he already has his own mission he wants to go on, but they have to convince someone to fund it. They have to convince a museum that they're going to get the byproduct of the research, yada, yada, yada. It's always like some biased thing, unfortunately. I'm unaware, and maybe you guys can inform me, of how these individuals would do anything independently to any level that is really scientific. So you might have some folks that save up some money. Maybe they work at a university for 30 years. They save it all up, and at 50 or 55 or whatever, they run out and they spend 10, 20 years or full retirement doing things, volunteering, and getting permits to go into foreign countries. Maybe that's possible. Then you have volunteers and interns and that kind of stuff, which also move the ball forward. And then you have locals that will assist as well because they live a mile away, and that's what the government pays them to do. So the anthropology that I have, listened to and read, mostly listened to because of the beauty of video lectures, is sort of split into two groups. One of them is, one category of anthropologists are the much larger group, and they are studying and insinuating, I think a lot of these folks are not necessarily trying to do anything nefarious. We know that institutions like the Smithsonian have been heavily accused of taking bones of giants here in North America and losing them. Again, mummies were burned in trains in the 1800s. There was a joke by engineers that they said, mummies burn hotter than coal. Yikes, right? Sounds hard to believe, but I've read that more than once. But we're talking about evolution, so we're probably talking about the origin of man, Homo sapien sapien. Okay. Well, probably one of the first things you think about is the missing link, which is what they call the era that seems to be completely devoid of any bones that look like our bones. Prior to the missing link, we have a ton of hominids, apes, monkeys, all kinds of stuff. And they seem to be in plenty. According to the carbon dating, okay, millions of years, hundreds of millions of years before Homo sapien sapien arrives, they have no problem finding the bones for these other species. Now, when I was a kid, the missing link, if you just hear those words spoken, listen to what I'm saying. Am I saying multiple links or one link? I think I'm saying a singular. It's a missing link. It is one species that has not been discovered that is the hybrid between the fully articulated human skull and the completely reconfigured bone structure of a human versus everything that preceded it. Big giant Bigfoot sort of hominid Yeti things that no longer exist, Cro-Magnon, Neanderthals, and then all of the things that we still have today, which is chimpanzees, apes, rhesus monkeys, all those things, right? Now, if you ask an anthropologist what is very about the similarities between supposedly our, tree climbing cousins and us, I was shocked to find out that their take on all of this is we share no bones whatsoever with any of those species. The ones that they, when they drew the funny little graphic from, what is it, a rhesus monkey going up to a chimpanzee, sort of an ape, a Neanderthal, and then us. As soon as you see that drawing, oh my God, for a lot of people, like me when I was a kid, it makes complete sense. But it's just a drawing. Now, the most repeated estimate that I'm going to give you of how long the missing link era went is 150 million years. And that's their science, right? So if you don't believe in carbon dating, that's fine. Think about it, though. They use their own little technique to create a big mystery as to how we exist. But now, what makes us different? Now, they might say, okay, per capita of a skull, our brain cavity is way bigger than the brain cavity of anything before us. And that, I believe that's true. You might actually have brains about the same size, but you have this big giant beast that's attached to it. So per capita, I don't know why. That's why they don't gain sentient, we do teach apes, I guess, and gorillas. I'm not quite sure what the species difference is between an ape and a gorilla. Maybe it's the same thing. They teach them sign language. It's phenomenal. They do communicate to us, right? Was it Robin Williams went and said goodbye to one of the famous female gorillas, and it was touching. It's amazing. She knew. He made a joke that he was just about as hairy as she was, which is really funny. He's such a great guy. Sorry to see him go, right? So it's not like they're completely devoid of communication, obviously. These creatures know how to communicate. Dogs know how to communicate. I'm not sure cats do, but I'm just joking. But like a wolf that can go in packs, lions that go in packs, it seems like they're communicating somehow, probably all mentally, right? But 150 million years, and then all of a sudden our skull shows up, and that's the most amazing thing. Because if I tell you that our bones aren't the same as an ape, you'll be like, what the hell are you talking about? It looks the same to me, rib cage, all that other kind of stuff. The thing about the difference of our bones is that, one, this is the way I had it described to me. The per capita bone mass that we have as a human being makes us the most efficient being of our kind. Not the strongest, but the most efficient. For as much mass as we use to be human beings, we don't burn a ridiculous amount of calories to get a lot of stuff done. An ape has gigantic shoulders and arms, and so what they ended up doing, and per capita of their bodies, right now, rhesus monkeys are little delicate little guys, but the shoulders weigh down on the rib cage, and so the rib cage for a monkey or an ape is teardrop. Our rib cage, our ribs start going sideways immediately, horizontal, all the way down. Big difference. So even though A fish has a jawbone, and we have a jawbone. You wouldn't think of a jawbone of a fish being relative to a human being. Life forces with mouths have jawbones, but they're all different. And so that's when they say the famous line that we don't have anything in common with these creatures. That's what they mean. You need to remember that when someone starts preaching all this we came from monkey stuff. I don't think we did. The human skull. This is where aliens showed up, God showed up. Why would God show up so late, We have the ability to articulate syllables, as Mike Myers calls them, syllables. So we can speak language. The fact that you can hear me right now. Well, what's the difference between us and an ape? Well, an ape has a gigantic cavern inside. They can howl and, make those little tiny howl noises, right? Howl. So that's when you go in the jungle, you hear all those screams and shrieks and wild noises. We speak. When you have an anthropologist detail the difference between our skull and any other skull of sort of a semi-upright, primate, it's a jaw-dropping dissertation when you see it. The amount of full re-engineering of what we are from what they are. Obviously, there's similarities. If you have two beings on Earth that can stand up straight, and rhesus monkeys can do it, apes can do it. They just they weigh so much from above, it's better for them to hit on their knuckles, right, and sit down. But something magical took place. Now, I've got a book in my house that I almost burned the second I started getting through it. It's written by these vegetarian fucking scientists, just whatever. And their whole thing is to, just like so many other movements where they want to change your complete identity by training you really young to completely deny what you are as a human being. That's how I see these folks who wrote this book, because it was their mission statement in the book was demonize meat and make vegetarianism the thing. Let me tell you, us eating meat was the thing that made our brains grow and our eyes grow, and it made us the dominant thing on this planet. Never get that confused, okay? You can be a vegetarian all you want, whatever. You're no longer contributing to the evolution of this planet. There's my bias. You'll have energy, creativity. You'll be on fire. Yeah, you might be a little more aggressive when someone starts to try to take away your freedoms. Think that's a bad thing? So if I didn't lose you with that little statement, man became the dominant species on this planet. Very quickly. Very, very quickly. We hunted in packs, just like every other creature on planet Earth. If we were reduced, the power went out in the world, and we're never going to have any back, and we have to rediscover everything, we would start hanging out in packs again. And we would hunt animals in packs because it's the only way to do it. Mono y mono, there's Africans that actually still have tribes that say, if you want to be a man, you got to go out there and hunt and kill a lion, a male lion. They don't even allow you to hunt female lions, which is kind of cool. No women, no children. Now, because the numbers of the tribes have actually leaned out a little bit, as most tribes over there don't do that anymore. They allow all the kids to go out by them or together in a pack and hunt an animal. But what do we do to hunt an animal? We found out this real interesting thing. It's not necessarily, it is an evolutionary property of who we are, but we can sweat. We have sweat glands. And even though an animal will sweat, it doesn't act as a true relief to them because they have fur all over their bodies. And so they dangle their tongue out of their mouth, right? So the way to kill a lion or any big animal is to do the slow boxing match. You wear them down. You chase them. You're not even have to worry about even trying to kill them. Hey man, if you get a totally cool shot, they happen to run around and get themselves in some cavern, and you can just nail them and go for it. But you run after them. I've seen several videos where Africans hunt lions, and it's mind-blowing. They just chase the lion around until it lays down and pants, and then 1,000 spears come in. He bleeds to death. Done. Eat the whole thing from head to toe, right? Save all the teeth for necklaces and all kinds of stuff. Save the fur. Everything gets used. It's funny how man used to do that. Now we throw away probably 2/3 of the food that we make in the modern world. Crazy. But think about it. We were re-engineered and we immediately became superior. Like, immediately. When you talk about the evolution or the timetable of how far we think or how long we think that this realm of existence has existed, it was damn near immediate. Boom. We're in charge. So then the question starts to arise, where did that happen? How did it happen? Well, most of you have heard the old saying that we came out of a single female in North Africa. All right. Who cares? Honestly, who cares? I think, honestly, for my black listeners, there's a pathetic thing that goes on with white people, and they, unless they're mapping it to Arab, know-how or whatever, as long as if a white person, some white people, when they get attached back to Africa and they realize they have black roots because black people create albinos and they're white, and if they continue mating, you will have white people, but if white people mate forever, you're never going to get a black person out of us. They hate that. So if you ever hear anyone being resistant towards that formula, and we don't know that that's exactly true, who knows, but you might get like a nonsensical resistance because of that racist reason. It's dumb. Now, what could have happened? Let's say the Big Bang never happened, but something, everything that exists today has existed forever. We're an is, and so eventually the random nature of the is, because everything does exist, life does form into a blue algae and grows up to be everything else. The vegetarian book, I forgot to finish my point. The vegetarian book would try to suggest that the reason why there's 150 million years of missing bones that account for this gap between what existed before Homo sapiens sapien and what existed after was that we went into the forest. We went into the rainforest, and that's where we lived. And because we lived in the rainforest, all of our bones dissolved into the rainforest, were eaten by the insects, and so that's how we lost all of our history. 150 million years. Don't think so. Nobody ventured out in 150 million years. Hell, 50 million years, nobody ventured out and said, you know what, you guys knock yourself out here in this forest. I'm going to go over the elephant bone graveyard and I'm going to see what's up north. I don't buy it. Now, could you imagine if there was some condition where the albino black was happening for some very specific nutritional reason, some other phenomenon, and there's a bunch of them, and they're shunned. And so they're pushed north or south. And they, mainly north, I would imagine, right? So they get into Europe and then they breed. And then we have this other lighter colored race. And because perhaps there's not so much sun, maybe we don't ever develop the thicker or the darker pigment in our skin. Who knows? Maybe. Just throwing things out there. But it usually devolves down to, I guess, 3 theories. Evolution did happen somehow. Not the way that they say, but it happened. 2, God just simply said, you know what? I have been working in my laboratory here, and I got this new design. Yeah, apes are pretty cool. Rhesus are pretty cute, except they steal my Fritos every time I let them in the laboratory. But I'm going to just throw this down here. Let's just see what happens. I think these guys are going to eat the whole place alive. Poof, we're there. Now, this whole Adam and Eve thing, and who knows, whatever. But there's the third one that I think, because of the sudden introduction and one other thing I'm going to mention, seems to bear truth to me. It speaks to me. It makes sense to me. And it's a little romantic, I guess. I'm probably guilty of a little bit of that, but I mean, honestly, I keep searching my soul and I keep coming back to this, and it's where it feels cool. And all the algorithms in my heart just all of a sudden go, perfect, right? And that is the alien drop-off. Perhaps the alien distribution. Now, visual cortex. Found out from an anthropologist, gave a very detailed medical presentation. Probably going to never find this guy. I've actually tried to search for this presentation. Cannot find it. 2 years ago, I went for this to share it with you guys. Couldn't find it. So frustrating. It makes you feel like a liar. But this dude went into great detail about the visual cortex, and he said that if you just envision the little grid of cells on the back of your brain where your eyeballs just happen to project everything upside down and backwards, what the luck of the draw that our brain has to sort out upside down and backwards. Didn't have to, but I guess it doesn't matter. It's all relative to our memory banks. I guess what we want is it to be physically aligned with the world that we see, right? We don't want to find out it's upside down and backwards, which is different than what we see. But the visual cortex is 5 layers of cells. And the guy basically said, just think of a slice of cheese, slightly smaller than a slice of like American cheese. I guess you have French cheese and British cheese over there too. But he said that there is a genetic blocker down the center of the first layer, which is what our visual cortex actually taps into, our eyeballs tap into, and our brain rasterizes this first layer. I guess it rasterizes all 5 layers, but it does not. None of the visual information we get from our eyeballs is traveling beyond the first half of the first layer. And he said that there is a genetic blocker in there. It just is like someone terminating memory. Like if you could zoom up memory in a computer, just terminating the memory so that nothing could jump over this little DMZ zone. That doesn't feel like evolution to me at all. 5 layers, 4.5 aren't used. Well, 5 layers would divide up 100% into 20% increments. Half is 10%. Okay. What would happen if we could use the rest of our visual cortex? What would it see? What if the light waves that we see with our eyeballs, be they photons that we normally see or a bunch of X-rays and ultraviolet light and a bunch of frequencies that we can't necessarily see? It's like Geordi in Star Trek Next Generation. He's got his visor. He could see all kinds of different bandwidths, and it became a very important tool to the story, all the stories that he was in. Well, it seems like if that was intentional, that there is something that is viewable with the other 90% of our visual cortex that might reveal where we are. There are lots of theories about interdimensional aliens that walk around among us. And what if you could see them if you had the rest of your visual cortex? Now, we also have a lot of land all over this thing we're on, a lot of different continents, and we always find indigenous life in those continents. Very few continents have ever been discovered with no human life on them because we get around. There is ample evidence that the Romans made it to South America in was it 400 AD? So we got around. Now, whether or not they turned into the Incas, who knows? Seems like we have it's one of the most brilliant things that we have this distinct genetics that are on different areas. Like the Aborigine look much different than the folks in Africa. Arabs don't look like Africans. Whites, we just divide up all the different nations that we have where we've inbred to look different. Obviously, we tend to pick what we feel like is the most attractive algorithm in the face. And I think I'm going to throw this out there. One of the most powerful evolutionary instruments of mankind is the woman. Not just because women give birth, but because women care about what we look like. Men care too, but we don't care as much. If it came down to okay, you can either have no sex or you can have some sex, but you may not find them terribly attractive if you've learned a formula that makes you turned on. Which one do you want? You want no sex or sex? And the guy's going to go sex, definitely, for sure. She's heavy, she's strange looking, doesn't matter. Can I have sex? Yeah, okay. But women, they'll abstain if they don't like what they see. Why do men age better than women? Because women design men. Women make choices about who the men are going to be, and then that infects both genders as soon as they have babies. The women are going to be their genetics and the man's genetics. Boom. The men will maybe take on after their fathers. Who knows? But now, here's what's interesting. I have been recently binge watching these videos. I think I just mentioned it in one that's not out yet. That I've been watching the videos where they discovered the tribes of New Guinea, some of the tribes in Peru, these tribes that have not been discovered yet. And there's others that are in the, I think it's Brazilian forests and Argentina forests and just the forest areas of the rainforests of South America. I don't hear it too much in Africa anymore. I come from a little town in Kansas named Chinook, Kansas, and one of the most famous things that ever happened for our town was that there was a woman named Osa Martin. Osa and Martin? Johnson. Osa Johnson. So she married Martin Johnson. She was 16 when it happened, I believe, maybe even younger. This chick was badass. She was a little teeny woman from my hometown. This guy met her. I think, here we go with the numbers again, but this was a different era. It was early 20th century. He comes to our little hometown and presents this African stuff that he went over and got. That's what he did. We go over and he would film new tribes that he had discovered, and he'd bring the video back with a bunch of their stuff, and then he'd just do a tour in the United States, raise a bunch of money, and go back and do it again. He bumped into Osa and fell in love with her. She was like 13 or something, really young. And her parents were like, yeah, go for it. Now, she was not we didn't make the soft little kids that we make today. You were pretty grown up by 16, to be honest, okay? 13, you were pretty amazing. But to give you an idea of the balls on this chick, okay, pardon all the slang, there's a video of her with a big, like a buffalo rifle thing. And there is a goddamn lion, male, big, running right at her. And this chick, like no more than 16 years old, just calmly lifts this gun. And I mean, it's like a movie. It's like a movie scene that you wouldn't believe if they did CG on it, right? You wouldn't believe it would have ever happened in real life. This thing's running right at her. She just takes this gun and goes boom and kills this thing. And it just dies, right? Now, back in the day, there were a lot of lions, so it wasn't exactly a big poaching problem back in the day. And then she turns to the camera and smiles. I got him. It's just that easy. So that's how ballsy this chick was. But anyway, they flew over so many times. He actually died in a plane accident, unfortunately, and then she ended up writing her story. The Osa Martin Johnson book is a very famous book. It's got a tiger skin cover, and I've got 4 of them in my house. They're about $150 if you find them nowadays. So when you see these tribes that are discovered, there's a brilliant one, this French guy, is like Jean-Pierre or something like that. I don't know when this video was shot, 1990s. It looks like to me it's a 4:3 aspect ratio. But he's filming, it's about a 17-minute video. There's 3 of them. This tiny tribe, this tiny like group of people. It's about 4, I just mentioned this, so I'm sorry, in a previous video, but we're on evolution. So this is fascinating to me because I made a friend of mine watch it yesterday. And then we had some more epiphanies that I want to share with you. But it takes about 10 minutes for him to let them come across this river. There's about 4 adult males, about maybe 6 little kids, seemingly all boys, but I don't know if you just can't tell. Some girls in there too, but just very few wives, maybe like 3 wives, fully pregnant, right? So they make contact with this guy, and they think he's painted because he's white. And they also think that he might be the dead, like a ghost. And so once they start touching him and stuff, and it's a very tumultuous first few minutes, and again, it is just like, what blew my mind was that when they touched hands, he would hold out his hand palm up, obviously thinking they might do their hand palm down, but they're doing their hand palm up too, and touching fingertips. And the second they touched them, they would literally trim or jump and grab a weapon and get ready to kill the person, right? But it was very much like the apes portrayed in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I don't mean to say that these tribes people were definitely black, but it was just an interesting fear thing that was happening. And I don't know where Stanley got the idea that might be a reaction to technology. And so it was just a fascinating thing. But this tribe is so endearing. Once they finally make full communication contact, they don't speak the language, but the guy's translating words and he ends up speaking their language. And they were just a wonderful group of people. They sang like a song of tribute to them when they left. I mean, it was just endearing. They dressed up too, but they came across the river and saw a bunch of modern technology. But here's what's interesting that I didn't pick up on. One, the chief of this New Guinea tribe looked like a famous actor who was in Deadwood. He played the general. He was a black guy. I won't say what they call him. They use the N-word. The N-word general's his official cast character name. He's a brilliant actor. He's been around since the 70s. He's phenomenal. But there's a genetic similarity in their faces. And I was thinking, oh my God. Even though this guy was born in the United States and became an actor and all this guy in New Guinea kind of looks like him. It's just wild how you see the genetics, go around the world, right? But this tribe had really, really long bows. I mean, these really beautiful, super long bows, and their arrows are really long, super straight. And of course, they also figured out weaving whatever they have access to into these really dense little capes that they wear, which they said was a kind of a raincoat by day and their blanket at night. And you see these they film these women, doing these elaborate sewing of these things. I'm sure the men do it too, but so think about it. Now, they had reported that they had found and actually harmed by another fellow tribe, and they had all their drums stolen that they used to use, and a bunch of them died. They died of malaria a lot, supposedly. It would seem like they'd be genetically immune to malaria, because how do you survive in the jungle if that's just flying around in a mosquito's belly, right? But Jean-Pierre and his guys gave them medicine to fight that moving forward, and let the authorities know, look, you got to visit these guys every once in a while and update their medicine. So anyway, we started looking at this, and then we looked at the tribes in Peru. Same type of bow, same type of arrow. The Peruvian tribe had very little cloth. They were mainly tying their body parts to keep them from being in the way. But it's funny how man, even totally sequestered, comes up with this stuff. All of us do. As if there's programming in man to do these things. And obviously, survival of the fittest, you're going to learn how to hunt, and there's only a couple ways that a human being can hunt an animal, so they figured out. This particular tribe was actually, because of the bird population in New Guinea, very apt at hunting birds, which has got to be, if I say go catch a boar, it's on the ground. It's much easier to corner and do whatever you got to do with. But a bird, it sees you, it flies away. It learns that you're a predator, and boom, it's gone. So you have to sneak up on the thing, pretend that you're a bird. This chief had all these wild whistles. Super cool. So the unanswered question for me, and again, we play the game, what if we were the aliens? And I know there's a lot of Planet X, Nibiru theories, and all this other stuff, but go see my episode on Planet X. We'll dispel the logic of anything that's been communicated about that phenomenon. We have structures all over the world that are completely unexplained. Craftsmanship that is off the chain. I mean, so ecliptically beyond where we are today, it hurts the brain if you really want to conceive of, geez, like how, you have like untapped earth, right? Just pure, unexcavated, untampered with earth. And then up on this hillside, you'll see stones carved in perfect 90-degree angles with, I forgot where it is. It's in South America. And what's interesting is South America, as well as Africa too, they get underestimated for their accomplishments. And then we find Machu Picchu and all these other crazy things. And they're extremely honest. They used to say, the Incas used to say, look, these were the people before us. They don't know anything about the people before them. Fascinating, right? But you'll find these structures in the middle of nowhere, sometimes made of rock that's like really, really far away. And there is I need to research it more, but there's this new way. Again, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with these theories that seem to try to minimize the ingenuity of prehistoric man, or at least the man that came before us, who's probably a hell of a lot smarter than we are about how to run the world. But there's the huge rocks in South America that aren't part of Machu Picchu, but they're big, dark, black rocks, and they're all beveled, and they're all interlocking. Most of you have seen this. But then there's that other location where they have these rocks that are stacked up and everything's 90-degree angles. I mean, like windowsills for no reason. Big, giant buildings that the locals said were carved by the angels, where they have like this temple that's carved in a plus sign, and it's out of one gigantic rock, and it's just perfect. It's just perfect. And you're like, holy hell. I mean, even the locals don't claim they made it. They say angels came down and did it. Well, what would an alien be? It'd be an angel. So if I was an alien and I had some genetic knowledge and I come down and I find the indigenous life, you'd start from that genetic, I would think. Then you have your own genetic that's obviously mastered the ability to travel or own a dome or whatever the case might be. And so you'd want to mix your programming with its programming, and you would know everything about it because it wouldn't be your first time. Earth probably wouldn't be the first time they would have ever done something like this. But then you need to nurture your new creature, because you do have, infants that are vulnerable. Human infants are extremely vulnerable, as most infants are. Now, with like certain creature, like an elephant it kind of stumbles for a little while. A horse, was it a mare, stumbles around a little bit. But, they're pretty good after a couple of days. They're little. That's about it, So they have to be able to avoid being hunted at the end of the pack. But that's why the adults are there. You've seen adult elephants protect their young like nothing else, man. Most creatures do. And it's out of love, right? That other force that we don't recognize, right? So then again, we have different quote-unquote races within the human Homo sapiens sapiens species. Today we have very distinct Asian looks, and we have very distinct African looks versus Aborigine. A lot of different whites, right? And in some cases we can see how two neighboring countries bred together. I was always told that a fair amount of the Russian population, because it's such a huge country, and because they simply say, you're Russian now, we've conquered your land, you're Russian. Oh, okay, I guess I'm Russian, right? But there's a lot of, whites that have crossbred with Asian, and so they have much different look. It's very interesting. So I'm not talking about the crossbreeding between our different races. I'm talking about sort of the core race. So what do we usually think about when we think about a race and how it forms? Well, some people got stuck there, and they mated. You get the Polynesian races, which are many, right? If you ever tell a Samoan, just walk up and say, are you a Samoan? There's all kinds of Samoans, right? You gotta be careful, because certain Samoans consider themselves over other Samoans. And so you can't just be flippant about some of those conversations. Probably the case with all races, right? If you're an alien, you've got flight. And so you see the world all at once, whatever shape it is. And you would probably want to say, okay, we're going to experiment a little bit here. And, maybe the white race was, if it was alien, maybe they did a little formula for up north because it's more snowy and they changed our skin. Maybe, Africans got a little bit different. Arabs are kind of in the middle, kind of an olive skin. You're more Middle Eastern look. Your Aborigines are obviously would be a spinoff of the black race algorithm, whichever, however they did that. But Aborigines have a different look, a different geometry to their face. What blows my mind about this is that, and especially with your various Samoan races, your Polynesian races that made it to faraway places like Hawaii, like was it Kamehameha's, the theory, the storyline there. It makes sense to me. Everyone on North America, South America, everybody in Europe, Africa, and Eurasia, all those races are a part of the bigger continents. And because Alaska, you can cross over in the wintertime, it makes sense that we got to both sides, even if we started on one side. That makes sense to me. Australia, Maybe if you go through the Indonesian islands and you just keep going south, okay, all right. But there's two places on Earth that blow my mind to pieces, okay? And the fact that at least one of them has phenomenal art and expression, which is Easter Island. Easter Island is so far out in the Atlantic boonies, it blows the mind that with primitive boats, because again, you ask the white man, was like, geez, it was like 17, well, I guess, sorry, we were going across the Atlantic at least by the 1400s, right? But we're talking about Easter Island's got these giant busts and they're full of people, right? They're all the way down to their feet, but they're just buried up to their necks. They got there. They found a way to live, right? I think today there's no way to live there off the indigenous food, I don't think. But they have these I guess, like gods that they carved, and they point their face in a particular strategic direction. Some point back to the island, some point out in the ocean. And then Hawaii. If you thought the Atlantic was big, the Pacific is massive. How do you put in a ship? Let's just take the 1400 ships, right? How do you accurately hit a needle in a haystack in the middle of the Pacific in a way that you can survive the trip? Think about how hungry these people were when they hit that island if they just migrated over in boats. So the alien theory is extremely convenient, of course, because once we start mentioning alien stuff, well, then we don't have to really do any science about anything else. So I observe that and understand that that's sort of the benefit of maybe cowarding down to that theory. But for me, the visual cortex thing was huge. The rearticulation of the skull was huge. And the fact that we are not physically the most formidable thing on this planet. And, you know, I've heard several comments over the last, 30 years where people were talking about, compared to all other creatures, including a house dog, we're pretty fragile. I mean, you remotely touch our skin with a claw, we're bleeding. Well, bleeding meant you walked through a river and you caught some amoeba and you got gangrene and you died. One thing I learned recently from this gentleman who makes those videos is that moats around castles, which are always portrayed at Disneyland, Disney World, and all the movies we've ever seen, as fairly clean, clear moats, and they're simply just like a mud problem and a depth problem for someone in armor to get across. Moats were actually the most disgusting things imaginable, because all of the sewage from inside these castles, you would go to the bathroom on one of the walls inside, and the chute just went diagonally straight out to the moat. So the moat is full of all the waste product of every single human being that's in the area. If you had any waste at all, they would put it through these holes and it would go down and rot. So you got a compost, you got a sewage, you got a septic tank down there. I mean, it's just awful. So falling into one of those things would mean almost certain death, because if you're in war of any kind, you got a cut. And if you got a cut and you fall in that, you are going to die within days if you're lucky, and it's going to be unbelievably painful, right? Probably the most fascinating question about evolution is, why do we care? Why do we care? For a scientist, it's a matter of academia. It would be submitting some theories that interlock to solve the question, so that you can feel completely enlightened about the existence of man and how we fit into the universe. I respect that tremendously. If you're religious, then it is really your sort of bond with God, your inceptional bond with God. You want to feel like, when you look at your hand, that it was designed by God. I think it was. I do, because I believe in a God. It's not the same one that organized religion believes in, but it's probably the same dude or dudette. If you're into the alien theory, and just think about it. Just think, if we ever had a visitation from aliens, a real one, not a fake one, think about how quickly it would change everything in your mind about evolution. I mean, it may even be subconscious. You're standing out in front of your house. Let's say you live on a circle or something. And here comes a flying saucer. Lands right in front of you. I got an episode called Meeting an Alien if you want to really digest the microsecond to microsecond state of mind you might go through with that. But just seeing something walk out that is most definitely not human. You see technology that's most definitely not from this world. You see them leave. You see them, maybe they give you some great sandwich or something. Without them saying anything. If your mind travels back to this conversation and every conversation you've ever had about evolution and the mystery thereof, wow, it's solved. It's solved up to a point without having a conversation with them and saying, did you put us here? Did you make us? Imagine having that conversation. Did you make us? I mean, if Roswell is totally true, as I have to admit, I do believe it is true up to a point, and then one alien survives, and they're able to communicate through mental telepathy or whatever, someone would have to have asked the question, that wild-ass question, did you put us here? Did you make us? Did someone like you do this? Do you know? Did someone else make us, but they're like you? Imagine the answer coming back, yes. Like how massive. You think you've had goosebumps in your lifetime? You'd have goose mountains, man. Huge. Now, the other thing is, we're kind of done with the core conversations. This is where I sort of meander to finish off the cigar and try to make it interesting for you guys. It's the bonus round. They always tell you, and it was funny, I think it was Dr. Stanton who just passed. God bless that man. He's a physicist who was a ufologist. If you haven't heard of him, he had the beard and the amazing eyebrows. He made a point once in a documentary about aliens. He said, because they said, do you think this will ever happen in your lifetime? And in the 90s, he was very certain it was going to happen in the next decade. And I thought that was interesting because Stanton always kept things pretty dry and pretty realistic. So if, there's that funny dude who I've never seen speak. He's in the memes with his giant hair, and I guess he did a documentary about aliens, and I've never seen that guy. I can't possibly take that dude seriously. God bless him. But Stanton always kept things pretty dry. But Stanton said, well, you know what? Even if aliens did come down tomorrow, I still have to go to work the next day. My bills are still due. Now, maybe if aliens came down and said, we're going to totally upgrade the world, maybe he's not right, but I think that would be the plan you'd have to plan for. Yeah, you're going to have to go back to work. You are. Even if it take a day off, right? Hey, man, I had aliens in my backyard. I just couldn't make it to work. You understand, right? So take that sentiment into your head and think about you. Well, let's just say aliens land all over the place. There's a bunch of them. They're all really nice. No one's got laser weapons. Yeah, there's a couple hillbillies that take shots at them. But maybe they know better. Maybe they can make us more comfortable. I don't know. Hopefully. Jeez. It's a scary thought that some guy would take a pot shot at one of them and ruin it for everybody. There's that funny-ass Far Side where the aliens that look like hands, that's their head. And so the farmer shakes their head because it looks like a hand. It's such a brilliant thing. But imagine you're able to ask the question. Everyone's asking questions, right? They got all the answers prepared, of course. They know what we're going to ask. But you ask that question, did you make us? And they go, yeah. If they said yes, what would you do? If you're a Christian and you're always told God did everything, would you immediately go to the devil card and demonize our creators, our cousins, our parents, whatever you want to call them? Wouldn't that be sad? We can't even appreciate the truth? I would hope not. I would hope we could deal with it. But now let me ask you this. Let's put it this way. Every single person alive today was raised with heliocentric round ball Earth. Everybody was. Still are. But there's this growing faction of folks that do believe we're still on a flat disk of some sort. Which I guess means we're really close to God or we're really close to aliens. It's really no other way to explain such an illogical shape floating in space. You have to negate all theories of ether and gravity to get to that point. Okay. And it's really an exercise in just, observing reality and only giving credence to what you can observe. The British guy made fun of people who said you can't see curvature of the earth from a plane, and which is actually the truth. But the guy didn't do any of his science, and so he's ridiculing everybody. So sad. Again, it makes me wonder if anything else the guy says is truth, right? But people were told, hey, these agencies that tell us it's round are caught telling all kinds of lies, moon mission lies, pictures of Earth from space lies. I mean, it's countless, right? Okay, so we have a bad guy on one side that's legitimate, and then we're trying to rediscover what we believe. Okay. Now that you, let's just say you never knew about the missing link thing I just told you, how big the missing link arrow was, about the visual cortex being blocked, and it starts to sink in with you. Do your own research, verify what I'm saying. By the way, if you find an anthropologist talking about that in a lecture, one of them was linked to a guy who eventually went off on Bigfoot. One was just a dude all by himself. Didn't go there. But both of them are by themselves. But let me know. Post in the comments, please. But now that you can conceive of the potential that an alien dropped this off, now we have to reverse engineer what could have possibly occurred. Did they create multiple versions of man with different purposes, different strengths, different weaknesses, and place us geologically where we would benefit most with our genetics and just let it go? And perhaps, who knows, maybe they had a very close relationship with us for a long time. All biblical references seem to say that God was around all the time, talking to us all the time, making us do ridiculous things, right? Angels coming out of the sky was a very traditional thing that was talked about. But we all know that if a primitive man were to see something come out of the sky, and we had no Star Trek in the last 200 years of fables, those things would be angels to us or something, kings. The dude, Jean-Pierre, I believe I got his first name right, who discovered the tribe in New Guinea, he was told by the people from Australia and New Zealand that they think, when they see a white man, that they think that you could be either the dead or you're a god. And the funny thing is when he was on this weird bridge, which was made out of a bunch of fallen trees, he's trying to stand up on the bridge and, offer his hands. He's showing them, I don't have any weapons. This guy's like got an arrow pointed at his face, and he's worried he's going to get shot. But he slipped and fell. He was offering them little bags of salt as a gift. And he falls at one point and drops one of his offerings. He also brought matches in a box, which is like, whoa. It was funny watching them. He struck a match and it was lit, and one of the guys grabbed the fire and burned his finger. And it was like, oh God, that's kind of risky, isn't it? Like, he burned his hand, maybe he might shoot you with an arrow second because you hurt him. But it all went well. But if, again, you can conceive of this whole alien drop-off thing, where did we take it? Are they responsible for all this incredible architecture we find around the world? Are they leaving behind sort of like blueprints to inspire man's thinking? You leave a wall behind. I need to talk about the wall thing too, because I got off on a tangent here. I stayed on track, unfortunately. But are these things left behind to teach them how to build structural integrity in a wall? There's walls in Machu Picchu where it looks like the interlocking walls on one side looks totally random until you realize on the other side it's the mirror image on the other side, like down to a millimeter on the other side. Once you see that, you can't unsee it, and you start to think, oh my God, who made this place? I mean, if man was trying to do it, that is unbelievable. So I want to say, because I talked to one of our fellow deep thoughters, there's this theory going around, which I need to look into, that, and it's so funny because I saw it online first, and then he said it, and I was like, oh my God, here's this theory again. I don't believe this for a second. mainly because of all the research. But in South America, those black walls, and I'll show some pictures of them. I'll put the name of where it is in the video so we can shore up our notes here. But they're now saying, one scientist said, well, if you mix a tree sap with one of these types of rocks, it melts the rock, and then you can pour the rock in place, and then you can make it whatever shape you want, so it's not a big deal. They didn't carry these rocks. They melted everything down. Really. And where's the sap go? It just falls out of the rock at some point, But then my buddy told me that they're now claiming, and I think this is complete bullshit, but I got to figure this out. If it's not, I'm going to have my mind blown. That they're trying to say that the stones in the pyramids of Giza were actually also poured into place. That's why there wasn't any problem with getting them in there. And they said they found wood fibers in the limestone. Outside of going to Giza myself, personally, I have seen microscopic photographs of all of these stones in a book called 39,000 BC. There's no wood in these rocks, okay? Maybe they dragged wood against it or something and then embedded it in little nooks and crannies and stuff. But I'm pretty sure, okay, when I studied my Egyptology for 6 solid, amazing years in the Bay Area, and interacted with, people who were there online. This woman named Annika, I was corresponding with. She was at one of the digs that was it's unrelated, but she was doing the tomb digging in the Valley of the Kings. There are quarries that are still in mid-dig from those eras. And they are digging rocks out and quarrying rocks out of bigger, gigantic chunks of rock, right? It's the whole bedrock of the entire area. But they're chopping these rocks, and they were left there. I have a screenplay that's based on those rocks. And so to suggest that they were melted down and put in place, well, then what are these quarries for? They're everywhere. We have obelisks that have just been freshly dug out, and they haven't been able to move them, and they broke while they were moving them because they're too big. And they're all over the place. They're not just in Egypt. So this idea that rocks are melted and moved around, they were trying to say that Coral Castle, which is in coral rock, right? It's limestone. It wasn't melted. The trucks didn't bring stuff, and he suddenly melts down a rock. Let's think about this for 1 second, okay? 60-ton rocks are at Coral Castle. All right, you get this melting technique. Okay, well, how long does it take to melt a 60-ton rock? And then where do you store all this fluid? And doesn't it dry at some point? And how do you pour it? And where's all the aqueducts and stuff, the tanks it's just an absurd, lazy-ass way of dismissing all this amazing engineering that we find all over the world. Man is an amazing creature, and because we are amazing, we are actually fairly isolated in the world, aren't we? You can't talk to your dog and have a full-on conversation back. Yeah, you can give him little commands. He understands what's going on. Dogs are awesome. Cats will do the same thing. Lots of animals are smart. Very, very smart. Of course they're smart. How would they exist if they weren't brilliant? If they couldn't conquer a predator? I mean, anteaters. My God, how many different anteaters are there in the world that do all this amazing, digging and eating termites and all kinds of stuff, right? Phenomenal. We have phenomenal things all over the planet. Octopus and squid. Talk about one of the most brilliant creatures in this planet that is so underestimated. They appear to be aliens to me, but they don't live that long. Most of them live less than a year. Even a giant squid lives less than a year. It's 50 feet long. It lives less than a year. They tell me anyway. Let me know what your feelings are about evolution in as much detail as you possibly can in the comment section. Again, we're not looking for low-hanging fruit comments. God just put us here. Well, everybody knows that theory. Save your breath. Save your typing power. Dig deep. Dig deep to tell me, well, one, is there a giant area of evolution I've completely missed? And you want to see the number 2 episode because, man, I get super complex in that episode. But, what what is the fascination for you about evolution? What are the questions that I didn't pose in this episode that still linger in your mind about where we came from? What does it mean to you to know where we came from? You know, certain religions, like Mormonism, they believe that God's a man, a physical man. They believe that when you get to heaven, you're going to pick the version of your body that you had on earth, whatever year you like, and you're just going to stay that year until, I guess, you pick another year. I think there's a frailty of man that makes it really comfortable for us to go, oh yeah, heaven's exactly like earth. Hey man, maybe it is. I don't know. God makes us in his own image. Is that an image of bones and blood and all that stuff? Or is it an image of our pure love souls that seem to strive for those things that cannot be explained by man? You know, one of the typical, and it's a tough one. It's a tough one here. Got at least half an inch left on this stick. Because we know that people have tumors in their brains, and when they have tumors in their brains, sometimes they can push on circuitry in there, and we'll have a violent killer. The Texas shooter in a long time ago, back in the 60s, right? He sat up there, some Marine, I think. I don't mean to tarnish any division of the military, but I think he was a former military guy. Maybe he was a Marine, maybe he wasn't, but he sat up there and he just took shots, and nobody knew where he was, and so people were dying down below, but he had a growth that was pushing on part of his brain. I can't remember what part of it was, but there's been several of these accounts, at least these claims, that that's why certain people go violent. And so a neurologist / atheist might say, well, see right there, his love circuitry didn't work. So if we're pure love and all this other hippie astrological stuff that you're talking about, then it doesn't make any sense, because a little tiny growth of skin inside the brain will neutralize your little theory in a couple seconds. Maybe. Someone who studies dopamine and adrenaline effects on the mind might simply say, well, your interpretation of love is your relative definition of what you like and what you dislike. Some people like drugs. Some people like people. Some people like things. What's funny is if, I'll just tell you a little piece of sociology. If you are psychology, perhaps, that it's kind of a sociological, psychological connection. People who are not hugged and loved and given an example of love as children typically start worshiping possessions, whether they be business possessions, like I have a big business, or they like cars and stereos and stuff. I have 2 people in my life that I know quite well that are that type of person. I was very fortunate to be raised with grandmothers who were extremely loving, got to meet great girls when I was growing up and had girlfriends and all that kind of stuff. So I had a really good 3-dimensional definition of love that wasn't any possession. You know, I don't think there's a possession in my house, besides my washer and dryer, they really work well, that I love. You know, I dig my computer. It blows my mind that I can do so many things at one time. Yeah, it's like a phenomenon, but I give the credit to the engineers, the human beings that actually made this machine work. It's just my style. It's just the way I'm wired. I don't know if you guys can hear the raccoon in the back. They're having a little territorial fight back there. Apparently they love the same place. You know, I think that crying is an amazing moment in a being's life. And we have seen every species of primate cry over the death of usually a newborn. We've seen it with all kinds of animals, right? Dogs defend their buddies in the middle of disasters. There's a dog hit by a car, and his buddy, not even a relative, will sit there next to him. And if you try to come up and help his buddy, he thinks you're trying to hurt him, because man's things hurt his buddy. And so he'll bark at you and, get away from my buddy. Some of the most heart-wrenching, endearing things on earth, animals. Humans cry more than any being on this planet. I guarantee it. Guarantee it. It's an evolutionary thing. It's part of our makeup. And it's really it's sort of the result of a pinnacle amount of self-realization, isn't it? If someone passes away or gets hurt, we feel their pain. We empathetically feel it. Then we feel our own pain. If they're no longer on this planet, whether they died of old age or whatever, we're going to miss their genetic input to this world. I think that's an amazing thing. Again, all animals seem to have this. So there seems to be this sort of common denominator of our wiring around the world. I don't know if fish have that. I tend to doubt it. Seems like the brain has to get to a certain level. Dolphins are pretty smart, but their brains are bigger than ours in the cerebellum region, I believe, which is their mechanical ability to swim. So most of their stuff is muscle memory, brain tissue, but they seem to be pretty sentient, and they have a lot of fun in the ocean too, right? They surf waves and they laugh and they play with people in the ocean, right? Too bad sharks aren't more like dolphins, right? I guess killer whales are actually not whales, right? They're dolphins, right? I was told that recently. Maybe one of you guys can set me straight. With all these questions that we have as man, one of the things that sort of subliminally filters around inside of our mind that we usually don't articulate is, are we ever going to find the answer in our lifetime, in our generation? That's usually sort of the goal, the desire. Oh gosh, if we could just figure this out in my lifetime, then when I die, on my deathbed, I'll go, whew, I know where we came from. Whew, I know where God lives. You might find out real soon after that, but I've always thought, and I've got stories that answer this question in one way or the other, but what if man gains so much sentient knowledge about the universe and its ecosystem of life, we could prove it somehow, like I've said in so many episodes, that on our deathbed, we really honestly, like some cultures do, we saw it as a journey. We saw it as the beginning of a new journey. We didn't fear it. We no longer fear death. It doesn't mean we don't want to die, as I've said in episodes dedicated to death. I have friends that it's so funny. I mean, like I said, I'll just update you guys from season 1. I have at least one close friend who's probably as close to an atheist as you could possibly get. He gave me a book, which was a bunch of descendants of, I believe, Freud. But they said in this, it was a bunch of academics from about the 20s to perhaps the 60s or 70s, and they wrote a book together, and it was just one chapter after another, treating, scientists and their opinions, but they all were unified in one thing, which was that they said that any human being that doesn't fear death, fear it, not avoid it, but fear it, is lying to themselves, and they're a primitive mind. And there's been never a book more in the psychological state of projection than this book. And the funny thing is, the guy who gave me the book will talk about death like it's no big deal, and how he wants to die, before he gets so old that he's, rocking around with a crutch or a walker or whatever. He doesn't want to get old. And so he's telling me by giving me the book that he's terrified of dying, and he keeps talking about how he wants it to be, he doesn't want to live a long time. I think he even joked about, the husband-wife going out at the same time thing on purpose. They haven't even had their grandkids yet. It's like, relax, dude, relax. But I think being centered in whatever definition you have for a creator, or you could be an atheist and also not fear God. I don't know how that works. You would have to tell me. But to realize that there's, all of the energy of the universe, whatever is out there, whether there's a substrate of love or whatever, it's out there and it can't be hidden anywhere. So your consciousness, if it is a separate entity from your body, which I think we've got plenty of proof that that's the case. Again, I met Walt Disney at Disneyland. Go see Angels and Demons for that episode. Or Ghosts and Demons, I think it was what it was called. But Ghosts and Demons. You're going to find this center of consciousness in the universe, whether it be the whole thing is one giant consciousness and we're in this instance of a body that restricts us from all knowledge, thank God. But now, to split an atom real quick for those psychologists that wrote that book. All right. So we don't fear death. Let's just say you're at peace with your creator, you're at peace with what you've accomplished in your life. You want to accomplish more and you want to live a long life. But you don't fear death. It's going to happen when it happens. That's it. Maybe it's painful. Maybe it's not. Who knows, right? It doesn't mean that if you're in some car accident or a potential car accident, or you step in front of a bus and you miscalculated everything, or it's not even in your control, someone's coming at you. For those few microseconds where time slows down, yeah, your heart rate's going to go through the roof. You are going to be afraid for that split second that you're going to die, but you're not afraid in the way that, there's something bad going to happen to you after you die. You just don't want to die. You just want to keep living because you enjoy life. It doesn't mean you're this, feral little child who's like, oh my God, every second of my life is to fear death and all this other stuff. Nah. I say that the more you accomplish in life that is according to your goal path in life, the less and less you're going to give a crap about dying, because you will have done everything you can do with your life. Or at least you took a big chunk out of your list of things. My hope is that you don't fear death, that you just try to avoid it. Evolution? Well, if we find our origins, imagine you talk to an alien and you say, did you create us? And he says, yes, our ancestors created you. Or we know who did, and they're similar to us. They live in a different place. Or they say, we created one of you, and others came down and created the others. And we created you actually in a different place. We brought you here and we dropped you off. We picked up some monkeys and stuff, what they eat and what they live off of, because we have to figure out what the ecosystem is of your planet, and we took them off, whatever, right? But then you ask the alien the second question. Is there a God? Maybe they understand what you're saying, maybe they don't. But if they did understand, what if they just said, we don't know? We don't know. What if they said, oh yeah, most definitely. And the whole soul thing that you guys are struggling with, that completely exists, and we orchestrate some of that too. We don't make the souls, but we know where to craft life, and we know how to get life to the point where it will attach to a soul. That's what creating life is all about. If you were Frankenstein, and you could, maybe not quite Frankenstein where you're chopping up other people to make a person, but you could synthesize everything in some laboratory or whatever, there'd be that connection moment where a soul is going to fall into this ethereal current that is the mass that you're going to be made out of, and poof, you got life. And it just sort of does magic. It just does it because the soul is ultimately intelligent and knows how to synthesize something that can exist. Maybe it works from algorithms that are local. Who knows, right? So anyway, I think I'll stop chit-chatting here. I hope you dug the episode. If you have been to deepthoughtsradio.com, that's where you will find episode 2 of the Evolution series. And you want to find the remastered version of it because it's a little less hard on the ears and a little quicker to listen to, because I've chopped out all the pausing and thinking. But we have 2 feeds for video. One is YouTube, one's BitChute. We have 2 feeds for audio, which would be basically your Android and your Mac platform. And your PC, I guess. We have 2 social media. One is Twitter. Don't do much. Just post the Twitter. Just post the feed to the video. That's it. I don't get involved with Twitter. It's too political. It's acidic. I don't like it at all. But we have our locked Facebook group, and if you're looking for a great place to meet super intelligent people of all walks of life and of all beliefs, just hopefully you're capable of listening to people say things that you completely don't believe, and you can laugh and have fun with everybody, then you're a perfect candidate for the Facebook group. We have two ways to contribute to the movement. We got PayPal, which nobody uses, and we use Patreon, which when the season's on, it swells up pretty good, pretty cool. I do run ads on these videos because I'm kind of experimenting with sort of what the ad revenue could be. I tell you what, because we've had some questions about me and the monetary thing. It really goes down to, I see these amazing videos. I see videos that have nothing to do with stuff we talk about. I just watched one yesterday night, which was a guy that took an old model of a Star Destroyer, one of the early models before it became the Star Destroyer, and it was a weird one. It didn't get put in the movie verbatim. But the dude's a 3D artist, and he spent some time re-engineering this thing. He used a few other people to help him out. He made this thing look amazing and sexy, and he redid it, and he lit it, and he 3D rendered it in space, put it next to a Star Destroyer, developed this beautiful theory and backstory about it. And then at the... this is something I'll probably end up doing for Season 5. he listed all of his Patreons. And he thanked them, and he said, look, I don't have to work because of you guys. I get to make these episodes, and they're amazing. And so I'm watching this, I'm getting envious. I'm like, wow, that would be awesome, man, if I could spend, every minute of every day creating awesome episodes. I mean, really super well-researched episodes. I probably have 30 episode titles that I want to do that are going to take me, 2 to 5 days just to do the research on them. I want to do them. I think you're going to love them. We're going to have a lot of fun. But I got to get that kind of mobility not to have to do other things to make money. So I'm experimenting with that, and that's the reason why. I would love to hire a few of you folks to help produce the videos, to monitor things, and pay you to do it instead of just being a volunteer. And we have some volunteers that probably have earned a few bucks as well, which I can't give them any money. So anyhow, that's the reason behind that. It's not that I'm some shilly guy. The show would be entirely different if I was a shill. Give me a break. I'd already be the other thing too is a shill makes money. That's the whole thing about a shill, right? They don't work. They can go to all these protests. They can go to all these conferences and carry global agendas. We ain't nothing like that, I tell you that much. But anyway, looking for suggestions too for episodes. Always open. This was a result of the same suggestion coming through 2 different people. I don't know what spawned that. Glad it did. And here you go. So, in the meantime, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.